Let's just take a quick word in prayer before we back into the book of Ruth. Join me. Jesus, we have sung that we were made to thrive. And there are certainly days and weeks and months and maybe even years when we wonder, what does thriving look like? What would it feel like? Because it'd sure be nice. God, help us to figure out what that looks like. What thriving means to you. Not to me, but to you. Jesus, help us to learn to thrive in your spirit, in your presence, by your power. God, help us to thrive not based on circumstances or our will, but to thrive based on who you are and your will for us. God, we want to know your will for us, and that's why we're opening your word, because we know that's where we find your will. We find your ways. We find what it is that you want us to know for today and the days to come. So, Jesus, I pray that by the power of your Spirit, you would enlighten our eyes, enlighten the eyes of our hearts, that we might know you better. That your word indeed would be alive and active and a double-edged sword. That it would be doing its work in us, cutting out that which shouldn't be and allowing to grow that which should. So lead us and speak to us this morning. In your name I ask and I pray. Amen. Well, indeed, we are in the book of Ruth these days, and last week we started in the first chapter of the book of Ruth, and we discovered last week that Ruth and Naomi and Orpah and the whole family were human. They were human. They lived with grief and loss, and they were human. We saw that Naomi and her husband Elimelech took their two sons and left the promised land and lived in Moab, and they were there in 10 years, and during that 10 years her husband Elimelech dies and her two sons get married, but her two sons then die. And Naomi is left with no one. No husband, no sons. She does have her two daughter-in-laws. But her daughter-in-laws are left with no husbands. There's grief, there's loss, there's pain. After 10 years, Naomi hears that God has showed up back in Israel, and now there is food there. There are crops growing there. There was a famine, but now there isn't. So she decides to go back home because she has nothing in Moab. Her two daughter-in-laws go with her the first day at least anyway. And Naomi says, look, I release you of any responsibility towards me. You don't have to come with me. Go back to your own moms. Go back to your own families. Orpah goes back, but Ruth stays. And Ruth travels with Naomi back to Bethlehem. Remember, it's in the days of the judges. They travel and they are safe on their journey back to Bethlehem. But they get to Bethlehem and Naomi discovers that the greeting she gets at Bethlehem is probably a little less warm than she had maybe hoped. And the place is abuzz, and the women say, boy, what happened to Naomi? Where's her husband? Where are her sons? Could it be? Oof, man, looking rough. Naomi sums up the first chapter really in verses 20 and 21 with this. Don't call me Naomi, don't call me pleasant, call me Mara, bitter, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me pleasant? The Lord has afflicted me, the Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. The theme of chapter 1 is really, Naomi says it here, the theme of chapter 1 is, I was full, but now I'm empty. And I don't know where God is, except that I think maybe God's against me. I think it's all God's fault. I think God's hand is against me. I was full, now I'm empty, and now I'm sorrowful, I live in pain, I live in grief, and I have nothing. And that kind of sums up what happened in chapter 1. But we do get a little glimmer of hope at the end of chapter 1. And maybe verse 22 should have been part of chapter 2, or maybe the first part of chapter 2 should have been in chapter 1. I don't know. But we get a seed of hope that they arrive in Bethlehem as the barley harvest is underway. The land that was empty of famine is now full of barley, is full of crops, whereas Naomi left full and she came back empty. And it could be there's a seed of hope that fullness can be attained again. And then we read chapter 2 and verse 1. And this is why I say verse 1 could very well have been the end of chapter 1 or something like that, because it starts out this way. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. That's our second glimmer of hope. I think those two should be combined. She arrived in Bethlehem during the time of the barley harvest, and she has a relative named Boaz. He's a man of standing. I think the author is giving us a little hope. I think the author is saying maybe fullness is on the way. Maybe something's going to happen. Here's Ruth and Naomi. They're in grief, in pain. They need help. They need healing, and they need hope. And I think the last verse in chapter 1 and the first verse in chapter 2 begins to give us a glimmer of that help. And maybe healing and maybe even hope. Because there's this man named Boaz who's of the clan of Elimelech. Elimelech was Naomi's husband. We don't know the exact relationship. Probably a cousin of some sort, but they're of the same bloodline. They're relatives. It's good to have relatives. Relatives are a good thing. When you're in trouble, relatives can help. When you need comfort, relatives can come. And there's this relative of hers, maybe a distant relative, maybe a second cousin. We don't know that for sure, but he's a cousin. He's a man of standing. The word here, man of standing, means he in the community is a man of wealth. We'll discover that Boaz owns fields. And he has workers in the fields, and he has a foreman in the field. Boaz doesn't have to do the work himself. He hires people to do the work. He's a wealthy guy. Standing also indicates he had position in the community. Perhaps he was one of the elders in the community that helped make decisions for the town and for the way things went. Perhaps he was one that people sought his advice for. He had standing of some sort. He was wealthy, he had position in the community, and not only that, but the Hebrew word also indicates that standing means he had character. He was a person of good character. He was a person that was respected, a person who was respectable. He was a person who perhaps people looked at Boaz and said, now there's a good man. Now remember, we're in the time of Judges. We read through the whole book of Judges, went through the book of Judges. There weren't a lot of people in which we could say he's a good man or a good woman. But here in verse 1, there's Elimelech, a man who they could say he's a good man. Yeah, he's a wealthy man, he has position, but he's a good man. Which often those two didn't go together. Often having wealth and standing in society meant that you did whatever you want to the detriment of those who weren't wealthy and didn't have standing. But Elimelech's a good man. And he's a relative. So there's hope. Perhaps the author is saying, chapter 1 didn't go real well. Chapter 1 was fullness to empty, but I want to tell you something, read on. Read on because there's some hope. There's some help on the way. Let's read on. Chapter 2, verse 2. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. I like that. Who's belonging to Boaz. Oh, who, by the way, if you missed it the first time, was a relative. So Ruth, the Moabite. It's interesting, the author continues to say, remember she's a Moabite. Remember she's a foreigner. Remember she's not someone from Israel. Ruth, the Moabite, said to Naomi, let me go out to the fields and pick up the leftover grain. Now, in Israel, it was called gleaning. In Israel, there was a law. It was Old Testament law that's found in Leviticus 19, 9 and 10. And said that, well, let me read it for you. Leviticus 19, verses 9 and 10, I believe it is. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. There we go. Leviticus 19, 9 and 10. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. I am the Lord your God. So there was a law that said, look, when you gather your grain, when you harvest your crops, when you harvest your grapes, when you harvest your figs, your whatever it is, don't go over it a second time. Don't go right to the very edges. You don't have to get everything. Don't say, this is all mine, and I'm not going to let anybody have any of it. The law was, look, you know you have the poor with you. You know you have people that don't belong to anybody with you, that you have foreigners with you. They aren't landowners. They need help. When you harvest, keep your mind on the fact that there are folks who have need. So don't purposely go to the very edge. In fact, purposely don't go to the very edge of your fields. Leave some. If you don't happen to line up perfectly and you've got a little strip that, oh man, I better go back and get that, leave it. Leave it for the poor. Leave it for the foreigners. And in fact, Deuteronomy 20-something or other. Let me get that for you. Now that I've mentioned it, I have to tell you. Deuteronomy 24:19 says, leave it for the widow. So they were in Israelite society to think about others. They were to love God and love others. By obeying this command, they were loving God, and by obeying this command, they were loving those around them. They were to let the poor, the foreigners, and the widows go behind and glean what they left over. Ruth happens to fall into all three categories, doesn't she? Ruth is poor, Ruth is a foreigner, and Ruth is a widow. Now, when we lived in Idaho Falls, there were a number of farmers in our congregation, and one farmer was a potato farmer. And after the harvest, he invited us into his fields to glean potatoes. So we all went, and we went into his fields, and we walked the fields, and there were hundreds of potatoes left. And so we got our bags, and we filled up our bags of potatoes, and we could have filled up a cellar or two full of potatoes. It was just a great experience to go into the fields after they had harvested, and the tractors had gone through, and they'd got everything they wanted, and you could go into their fields and you could pick up the potatoes that were left behind. That's kind of the thing that's happening here. The foreigner, the poor, the widow, they would be allowed to go into the fields and they could follow behind the harvesters. And the edges of the fields they were supposed to purposely leave, and anything else they were supposed to purposely leave. They didn't have to, if they dropped it, they didn't have to go and pick it up and make sure they got it. Okay, just leave it for the poor, the widow, and the foreigners. And so that's what's happening here. Ruth, the foreigner, the Moabite, says to Naomi, hey, I'm going to go out to the fields and I'm going to do this gleaning thing. And Naomi says, okay, go ahead. Go ahead, my daughter. So she went out and entered a field, began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, lucky thing is really, we could interpret it that way. Oh, what a lucky thing. As it turned out, it just so happened that she was working in the field of Boaz. You know the guy who's her relative. Of course, the author's not saying it was luck. The author's not saying, wow, what a great happenstance. As it happened, no, the author wants us to know this was on purpose. It didn't just happen. Ruth didn't just get lucky. God was involved in this. As it happened, as it turned out. Lucky thing, don't you think, that she ended up in the field of Boaz, her relative? The reader's supposed to go, no, that's not luck. It's written in such a way that we as a reader go, God's behind this. Something's going on here. There is help happening. There is hope happening. There is healing that is happening. God is doing something. Now remember, we're in the time of Judges. As you read through the book of Judges, and during that time, there's not a lot of God happening. So we come to the book of Ruth. And the author says, as it turns out, God is behind the scenes. And just then, verse 4, just then, as it happened, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you, they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, who does that young woman belong to? The overseer replied, she is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So there she is. She's gleaning in the fields. Just so happens that she is in the field of Boaz. God's at work. God's doing something. It just so happens that at that moment, Boaz arrives from Bethlehem. Boaz lives in Bethlehem. He comes out to his fields. He wants to check on the progress. How the workers doing? How's the gleaning coming? How's everything looking? And we get a bit of an indication of Boaz's character here. He arrives from Bethlehem. He greets the harvesters. Boaz is the boss. Boaz owns the field. He's the owner. Owners didn't have to interact with their workers. Boaz does. He greets them. He makes sure he greets them. He treats people well. He says, the Lord be with you, and the Lord bless you, they answer. He's kind of going up to him and he's saying, hey, it's up. What's up, man? How are you? Kind of thing. I remember Randy doing the, what's up, man? That's what I think of when I think of this passage. I think of Randy. Maybe I should have you come up and, no, never mind. All right. So Boaz is there. He's going, what's up? Now, it is important that they use a greeting of the Lord be with you, because there wasn't a lot of mention of the name of the Lord in the time of the Judges. But Boaz purposely uses a greeting that includes Yahweh's name. So we get an indication that Boaz is an upright, good guy. He knows Yahweh. He seems to be someone who is wanting to serve God, because he is leaving the gleanings in the field. During the time of Judges, the reason that they were having such trouble is because they weren't following God and they weren't following God's words. And so God said, okay, if you want to step outside a covenant and not follow me, this is what's going to happen. Well, here's the grain come back, and God is back in their midst, and Boaz could have said, man, we've had a long famine, so I better get everything I can. But Boaz says, no, I'm going to follow God. I'm going to follow the law. I'm going to live in a right relationship with God. I'm going to love God, and I'm going to love others. And he allows gleaners in his field. And so he goes and he checks on it. And he asks his overseer, he asks the foreman. He goes up to the foreman after he's greeted his workers, and he says, so how are things going? Yeah. And who does that young woman belong to? Now, it's interesting. He doesn't say, who is she? He says, who does she belong to? Because in those days, your security, your provision, your protection for a woman was dependent upon who you belonged to. Your dad or your husband or maybe an older brother. Whose family is she from? What clan is she from? Who's in charge of her and her family? Who does she belong to? And the overseer replies, and again, the author continues to give us, she's a Moabite, right? Oh, well, she's the Moabite who came from Moab. Like, why would you say that? She's the Moabite who came from Moab. Well, of course she's a Moabite. She came from Moab. I mean, where else would she come from? She's a Moabite who came from Moab. She's the foreigner who came with Naomi. She's the one everybody's been talking about. You know, the foreigner. She's the Moabite. Oh, yeah, okay. She said, though, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She came in this field. She's remained here all morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. The foreman says, yes, she's a foreigner, but I want to tell you, she's very polite. She came and asked if she could glean. She made sure it was okay to do that. And she's a hard worker. She's been in the field the whole time. She had a short rest, but she's been in the field the whole time. She's respectful, she's polite, she's hardworking, she's willing to be a gleaner. I mean, I kind of asked the question from before, why didn't Naomi come and glean? Like, why didn't Naomi glean? Now, some people will say, oh, well, Naomi was too old to glean. Look, how old do you think Naomi could be? She lives in Moab for 10 years. Her sons were married during those 10 years. So her sons could have been, even when they came, if her sons were 15, and they get married when they're 20. So that's 5 years. Another 5 years, her sons are 25. How old do you have to have a 25-year-old son? Maybe she had a son when she was 20. Maybe she's 45. Maybe when she was 25. Maybe she's 50. She's late 40s, early 50s. That's not old. She's not an old 80-year-old woman. She's Naomi, young enough, in her 50s likely, to be able to glean. Ruth is the one who says, hey, let me go glean. Ruth, the foreigner, is the one who says, I'm going to humble myself and glean. Naomi doesn't. Naomi's grieving. Naomi's embittered. Naomi she left full, came back empty. Maybe Naomi is like, man, I'm not going out there and gleaning. I used to own the fields. I'm not. But Ruth goes. And that impresses the overseer. That impresses the foreman. And she's working hard. She's been here the whole time, and she's taken one rest. She went in the shelter once to get out of the sun. So Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter. Again, it's a sign of respect for her. It's a sign of Boaz's age difference with Ruth, just as Ruth's mother Naomi said, go ahead, daughter, in verse 2. Boaz calls her my daughter. Listen to me, he says. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from there. Or from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along with the women. I've told the men not to lay a hand on you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water pots the men have filled. So Boaz says, look, daughter, it's a sign of respect. It's a sign of treating her well. Boaz treats people well. Remember, this is the time of Judges. The last two stories that we read, and more stories that were read before that in the time of Judges, women were not treated well. People in general were not treated well. But here's Boaz living in the time of the Judges, who seems to want to serve God and be in a right relationship with Him, and therefore is treating people well. And he treats Ruth well, even though she's a foreigner. See, the Israelites said, man, we're chosen by God. You guys are foreigners. You guys don't get the same respect that we get. But Boaz treats her respectfully. Boaz gives her kindness. It shows Boaz's character. He says, don't glean in another field. Don't go away from, stay here. I have more fields. They're going to be moving across the road. They're going to be moving down the road. Just watch where they glean. Those are all my fields. Stay with my workers. Stay with the women that I employ also. Just stay with them and glean with them, because I want you to be safe. In fact, I've told the men not to lay a hand on you. That's an interesting statement. Because if he has to purposely tell the men not to lay a hand on her, you can tell that the society, the time in which they're living in, it wasn't uncommon for men to abuse the women who were gleaning. Because the women who were gleaning were poor, foreigners, or widows. They had no protection. Often in that culture, especially during the time of Judges, those who were gleaning, those who were working in the fields would see young women coming to glean, and they would abuse them. And they'd treat them poorly. And when they had their way with them, they would throw them away and kick them out of the field. That was common during those times of the Judges. But Boaz says, I've told all my men, I've told all my workers, don't touch Ruth. Don't treat Ruth poorly. Respect her. Honor her. In fact, protect her. And provide for her. He says, whenever you're thirsty, go get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. That's uncommon. The men, before the harvest began, they would have filled up water jars for the day. When they took their breaks, they would have gone there and had the water. And water was not for the gleaners. Water was just for the workers. It was for the paid employees. You want to come and glean? It's on your own time, on your own dime. Bring your own water. But Boaz says, not only have I told my men to protect you, but I've told them to provide for you. Guys, she can have a drink of this water anytime she wants, and she can have as much as she wants, so lay off. You treat her well. At this, verse 10, she bowed down her face to the ground, and she asked him, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? See, Ruth knows she's a foreigner. Ruth knows that Boaz doesn't have to do this for her. Ruth knows that she is looked on unfavorably as a foreigner by the rest of the town. She says, why are you being so kind to me? Don't you know? Remember, I'm a foreigner. You don't have to do this. Why are you being so kind to me? And Boaz replies, I've been told all about what you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. How you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Boaz replies essentially, look, I know who you are. And everybody's been talking about you, and I want to tell you something. I like your character. You're a person of good character. I see how that you're a foreigner, and I see how other people treat you, and I see that you treat people well. I see that you aren't mean and you aren't yelling things back when people call you names. I see and I know and I've heard that you yourself are a person of good character. So Ruth, I'm treating you well because you're worth it. Because God says you're worth it. He says that in verse 12. May the Lord repay you for what you've done. May you richly be rewarded by the God of Israel. God thinks you're worth it, Ruth. God sees worth in you, Ruth. You're not foreign to God. You are loved by God. You're not just not squeaking in and God tolerates you. Ruth, I want you to know something. You're more than tolerated. You're loved. You have worth in God's eyes. Ruth, who is grieving, is beginning to find grace. Ruth, who needs help, is beginning to be helped. Ruth, who needs healing, is beginning to be healed. And Boaz says, you're worth it. You're worth it in my eyes because you're worth it in God's eyes. And may God let you know how worth you are. May God reward you. May the grace and love and mercy and kindness of God be upon you, Ruth. Even though you're a foreigner, you're not in God's eyes. He says, may the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Ruth, I want you to know that it's the God of Israel who does this for you. It's not me, Ruth. I'm not a great guy. I'm not an awesome guy. It's because I serve God, the God who loves you, is why I'm doing this. Because Ruth, the God of Israel, loves you who are not part of Israel. He's praying for provision. He's praying for protection. He's praying for the grace of God to be in her life. Ruth, I pray that you might know God as his child, not as a foreigner, but as his family. She responds, may I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord, she said. You've put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants. Though I am less than your servant, though I'm no one, though I'm a foreigner, though I'm the least of the least, may I continue to know the grace of God. Thank you for the grace that you've given me. Thank you for helping me understand and know and experience the grace and love and kindness of God. May I continue to find that in your eyes, Boaz. May I know this, God, is what she's saying. May I understand the love of God. May I come to cherish the love of God. You've put me at ease, Boaz. You've spoken kindly to me. I was fearful of gleaning. I'm fearful of being a foreigner in this land. I'm fearful of what's going to happen. My mother-in-law is embittered towards God. I don't know who this God of yours is. I've got mixed feelings about it, but you have eased my mind. You have taught me. You have extended the grace of God to me. Boaz, thanks for grace. Thanks for meeting me in grief to extend grace. Thanks for helping me. Boaz, thanks for giving me hope. There's hope. She begins to feel that. She begins to know that. She begins to understand that. And there's more that happens in verse 14. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here. She's out over there at mealtime. It's the workers, it's the paid employees kind of thing. Here's the table, I'm feeding you, it's dinner time. Ruth is standing kind of over there. Maybe she's starting to pick some of the grain that she's gleaned and is going to eat that. And Boaz looks at her and says, Ruth, come here. You're not out there. You're a part of what's happening. You're not a foreigner with God. You're family with God. So come and be family. Come sit here. When she sat down with the harvesters, let me finish 14. At mealtime, Boaz said to come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar. Come and share this with me. Not only do you just get the crumbs from the table, but you get the good stuff too. Your family. I know you're a Moabitess. I know you're from Moab, and we've done this whole foreigner thing, but your family. Come and eat with me, and I will eat with you. Jesus says those words in Revelation 3:20. It's an invitation to the table as family. It's healing. It's help. It's hope. The theme of fullness to empty is starting to be reversed. and there's some fullness that is coming into the emptiness. Something's happening. God is doing something. God is bringing order and design. Remember, the book of Judges is all about chaos, confusion, and corruption. We start seeing in chapter 2 the order and design and goodness of God. Even in the midst of a corrupt generation, in the midst of a corrupt society, God is there, bringing design, bringing order, and bringing his goodness. So she has some bread, dips it in the wine vinegar, dips it in the sauce. When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She is clearly near him, if not next to him. Offers her some roasted grain. Here, have some good stuff. This has been prepared. This has been cooked. This is the best it gets. We just picked it this morning. I had my cooks prepared for us. It doesn't get any better than this. This is as fresh as it gets. You're going to love this. This is great. Come and have some. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. Isn't that a picture of going from emptiness to fullness? She had all she wanted and had some left over. Boaz never said, whoa, 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 hey, slow down, don't eat so much. I invited you to the table, but don't pig out, man. Boaz said, have as much as you want. Make sure you're full. Don't stop until you're full. And then she had some left over. God's grace is that way. God's grace has more than enough. God's grace is extended to us, and he says, take all you need and all you want. Go ahead and take as much grace as you can take. As much as you can carry, as much as you can possibly need, take it all and have some left over, because God is generous in his grace. He doesn't give us just enough. He gives us enough and more. He makes sure we're full and then some. She's beginning to understand who God is. She's beginning to know his grace and his goodness. She's understanding what it means to be helped, to be healed, and to find hope. So, when she sat down with the harvesters, end of verse 14, he offered some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. And 15, as she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men. She's getting up, and Boaz says to his men, while she's getting up, she can hear this. Says, guys, men, I want you to know something. See this woman here? You let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Let her take all she wants. Don't shoo her away. Don't say, isn't that enough already? Don't reprimand. Don't make her feel bad. Don't make her feel ugly. Don't make her feel less. Because she's important. Because God sees her as worth it. And then he says, even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her. Help her. Even help her. She's going to glean all of this, but you know what? Even do stuff for her. Not only don't rebuke her, but help her. Provide for her. Be gracious to her. Treat her well. Boaz, who's kind to her, is teaching his workers to be kind. If you love God, you got to love people. So be kind to her and love her and help her. So, verse 17, Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to an ephah, which is 30 pounds of grain. She carried it back to town. Imagine she's carrying 30 pounds of grain. Think about, let's see, what would be 30 pounds? A bag of, if you have a water softener, the bags of water softeners are 40 pounds. There's other things I can't think of, but she's carrying 30 pounds of grain. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten. So she comes home with 40 pounds of grain, and she comes home with the leftovers from her meal. I think this is probably the first time that women started carrying a purse. Because she's at the meal table and she said, man, I got this leftover stuff. What am I going to do with it? Wrap it up, put it in my purse. She brings it home to Naomi. Naomi, not only have I gleaned for you, not only have I got 30 pounds of grain, like we're going to eat well, but look, I've got fresh roasted grain with some wine vinegar. Eat up, Naomi. I've got it for you. Her mother-in-law, 19, asked her, whoa, where did you glean today? Like she's obviously impressed. How did you get this much? Where in the world did you glean? This is amazing. It's unheard of to have that amount. Honestly, 30 pounds of grain was it was really unheard of. Gleaners never got that much. And of course, she was being helped by the workers to get more grain. So she comes back with this huge amount of grain. She carries it back. Her mother-in-law sees it. Where did you go to glean? Where did you work? Like, wow. And she says, Naomi says, blessed be the man who took notice of you. That's significant. Why? Because I wonder, Naomi who has said, don't call me pleasant, call me bitter. I've been very embittered by God. Yahweh's been against me. Yahweh's not shown grace to me. He's not shown kindness to me. He has made my life terrible. I've gone from here full and now I'm back empty. But she sees the fullness that is brought to her. She sees the result of the kindness of God to her. And could it be that Naomi is moving out of bitterness and into blessing? Naomi sees the grace of God. Naomi experiences the grace of God. And it could be that she's moving from bitterness to blessing. And she's blessing someone else. May the Lord bless you, or blessed be the man who took notice of you. She's come to a point where she can begin to bless others. There's healing that's happening. There's help that's happening. There's hope that's taking place. Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz, she said. Verse 20, her second blessing. Now in the Lord's name. The Lord bless him. May Yahweh bless him. She said to her daughter-in-law, he has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. She added, that man is our close relative. He's one of our guardian redeemers. I can't believe you're at Boaz's field. I can't believe it's Boaz that you hooked up to. This is amazing. Because Ruth, what you don't know about Boaz is he is our close relative. He's a close relative of my late husband Elimelech. They're of the same clan, of the same family. In fact, Boaz is our guardian redeemer, our kinsman redeemer. What does that mean? He's a guardian redeemer. That's pretty huge, actually. The guardian redeemer, the kinsman redeemer in Israel, the Old Testament law said, and I'll read it in a minute from Leviticus 25. But the law said that if you lost your land, or you had to sell your land, someone from your family could redeem it for you. They could buy it back for you. The law always had it open that if you bought a field from somebody, so Elimelech sells his field to go away to Moab. The law said that a kinsman redeemer, someone of your family, of your tribe, of your clan, they could buy it back. They were allowed to buy it back. Whoever bought it could not say, nope, sorry, it's mine now, you can't have it. Whoever bought it with the understanding that someone from the family could buy it back for them. There was always a way to redeem what you had lost. And so Boaz was the kinsman redeemer. He could redeem that which was lost to Naomi. It's huge. Let me take you to Leviticus 25. Leviticus 25. In some verse, I think we're in 25:20. Let's see. 25:25. How about that? Leviticus 25:25. If one of your fellow Israelites becomes poor and sells some of their property, their nearest relative is to come and redeem what they have sold. If, however, there is no one to redeem it for them, but later on they prosper and acquire sufficient means to redeem it themselves, they are to determine the value of years since they sold it and refund the balance to the one to whom they sold it. They can go back on their own property. But if they do not acquire the means to repay what was sold, will remain in the possession of the buyer until the year of Jubilee. It will be returned in the Jubilee, and they can go back to their property. So the law said, if you needed to sell your property for whatever reason, but you could buy it back later, you were allowed to do that. Or a kinsman redeemer could buy it back, they could buy it back. And there was this thing called the year of Jubilee. Every 50 years, the land that was sold, bought and sold, reverted back to the original owners, so that every tribe and every family had their land. See, land is huge with Israel. It's the promised land. It's not to be given away. It's not to be sold. It's to remain so that everybody has their chunk of land and everybody has the opportunity to be economically well. So it wasn't about someone buying up everybody's property and becoming super wealthy and everybody becomes super poor, and it wasn't about that. It was after 50 years. So if you bought property on year 2, you paid for 48 years worth. And then on the 50th year, it went back to the original owners. Or if your kinsman redeemer said, hey, I'll buy that back for you, and they wanted to buy it back in the 20th year, then they bought it back from... they would calculate if you bought it in 2 years and you've had it for 18 years and now you've got 30 more years to go, this is what it'll cost. So in a sense, you were buying the land to rent it for as long as, until it was redeemed either in the year of Jubilee or by a kinsman redeemer. So Naomi, when hearing the name Boaz, says, wow. Do you know who Boaz is? Boaz is not just some guy. Boaz it's not just a happenstance that you went there, daughter. Boaz happens to be our close relative. Boaz happens to be the guy that can redeem the land for us. Boaz happens to be the guy that can bring us from emptiness to fullness. There's redemption going on here. There's help, there's healing, there's hope, there's order, there's design, there's goodness. Then Ruth the Moabite said, he even said to me, stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain. He even said, hey, you can stick with me the whole harvest, not only the barley harvest, but the wheat harvest, which is next. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed. Stay there. I've got a quick question. If she knew that she could be harmed in someone's field, why didn't she tell Ruth that at the very, very beginning? Like, why didn't Naomi bring that up when Ruth said, hey, I'm going to go glean? Why didn't Naomi say, hey, be careful, because I want to tell you how this could work? Naomi evidently wasn't there, wasn't able to do that. She was grieving more at the beginning of this chapter than at the end. Because I think Naomi's beginning to experience fullness. She's beginning to see help, and healing, and hope. She's going from bitterness to blessing. Her world is opening up again. And she's beginning to experience the grace of God once again. The same God whom she said made me bitter is now the God that she's saying, may the God bless you. I recognize that God brings blessing, not just bitterness. So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvest were finished. And she lived with her mother-in-law. That's a way of saying, so it was. And so it was that Naomi and Ruth lived. And so it was that Boaz provided and protected her. And so it was that God was at work. See, that's what's going on here. We don't have any prescriptive words from the narrator saying, so thus saith the Lord, but he leaves us with the lesson. So it was that God is at work in the lives of people. In the time of Judges, when it's a time of chaos, it's a time of confusion, it's a time of corruption, there is design and order that God is bringing to the lives of people. God's still there. They're looking for help, they're looking for healing, they're looking for hope. And God provides those. God's grace, His goodness is poured out on their lives. And God says, I'm here. And so it was that God is at work in their lives and yours. God is at work. He will bring healing and help and hope and order and design and grace back into your life. Because God is at work. Amen. May the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn His face towards you and indeed give you peace. Thanks for joining us. Be blessed.